We'll be switching to the topic of lottery. What does Islam say about lottery? We'll be taking your questions, so you can have those three avenues to ask your questions about that. And before we take your questions, we'll let Imam Sahib say a few words, and then we'll start taking your questions on that. Imam Sahib.
So gambling is something that has been described very clearly in the Holy Quran, and that it is something that is forbidden. In fact, it's mentioned along with alcohol as well. And what's described there is that it is forbidden because the harm outweighs the good. And so this is the principle that has been taught, that although there is some potential of there being good in alcohol and gambling, but because of the harm, it is something that is forbidden for all of us. This is the same thing that applies to lottery as well. Hazrat Muslim Maud Rizwan anhu and our Khulafa have categorized lottery as being something that comes under that category of maisar, of gambling, which has been forbidden in the Holy Quran. Now essentially the reason for why gambling is forbidden is because of the destructive effects that it has on individuals and on society. And it doesn't take a whole lot of research to find statistics on the amount of harm that it does to people. In fact, when it comes to lottery, it is something that not only harms the people who waste their money and don't end up winning anything, but ironically it actually does a great deal of harm to the people who end up winning the lottery as well. The few people who are supposed to be benefiting at the expense of the harm of everyone else actually end up being harmed ultimately as well. In that statistically, when we look at their stories and we look at the circumstances that they went through after they won the lottery and what their financial situation was and also their personal situation, more often than not, winners of lottery actually end up having harm in their lives. It ends up ruining their lives. So just from a very practical perspective, lottery and gambling is something that has been forbidden in Islam.
Jazakallah, Imam Sahib. Our first question comes in. The questioner is asking that since interest and gambling is prohibited in Islam, the promised Messiah has also said that it can be used to be donated towards the cause of Islam. So is this case true for lottery? If someone wins a lottery, can they use it for the propagation of Islam?
So there's two aspects to the question. One is that can lotteries be organized for a good cause, and also if someone wins a lottery, can it be used for a good cause? Well, for example, what we have here in the United States is that lotteries are organized by the government with this justification that it is going to be used for education. Now the fact that it actually does not end up benefiting education at all because the previous money that was often reserved for funding education ends up being reallocated towards other projects is a separate subject. But can lotteries be organized for the sake of a good cause? This is something that in Islam is not permitted. It does not matter what the cause is, no matter how good the cause is, if something in and of itself is harmful, then it is forbidden in its own subject matter, in its own essence. Not because of the consequences of whether a person tries to, maneuver it into something positive. In fact, this is one of the original conditions or states of gambling that existed in Arabia, in the context of which it was forbidden. Not to say that the forbidding of lottery or gambling, which is mentioned in the Holy Quran, is confined only to the circumstances in Arabia, but this is a circumstance that existed. There was a form of gambling or lottery that existed in Arabia during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where when it came time to go to war, then this system was used where the person who lost the lottery would end up having to fund the army and all of the expenses of the army. Now this is something that could be for a negative cause if the war is for a bad purpose, but it could be for a very positive cause as well. For example, if a person is defending their homeland, funding that war is a national responsibility. It's a very important individual responsibility, and it's a good deed. Now even though funding a war to defend a person's own homeland and their family is something that's considered a very good deed in Islam, but still that gambling was forbidden through the Holy Quran. And so whatever justification there is, whether it's used to fund defensive jihad, whether it's defensive warfare, which is jihad, or if it's used to fund education or fund whatever noble purpose we want to come up with, the building of schools or the propagation of Islam, if the purpose for which if the means by which we are collecting that money is against Islam and is forbidden, then the way that money is spent is irrelevant. It's not something that is permitted. Now the second question is that if someone happens to win the lottery, then can they donate it towards a cause that is good, towards the cause of Islam? When it comes to Muslims or Ahmadi Muslims, for them to play the lottery is something that is forbidden. And so if somebody is involved in gambling, and the Jamaat comes to know of it, then any financial contribution from that person will not be accepted in general, because that person in the first place should not have been involved in it. Now, if it is from a non-Ahmadi or a non-Muslim, somebody who happened to win the lottery, and out of that lottery money, that person wishes to contribute something towards the Jamaat or for whatever good purpose, in that situation it is something that is permitted. This is a question that was asked of Hazrat Muslim Maud radiallahu anhu as well, that a person had won the lottery and they wanted to contribute it towards the building of a school. And so Hazur said that if you were not involved in the winning of that lottery money, then you can accept it from that person. And as I understand it, the principle behind it is that we are not allowed to participate in the wrong ways that a person acquires their money. But once a person has acquired that money, whatever it is, then it is not our position to question that person or to try and investigate as to where that money came from. We generally try and prevent people from doing something that is wrong. But if somebody wishes to contribute something from the money they have, then they are permitted to contribute it if that person is not an Ahmadi or is not a Muslim and wishes to contribute something of their money. So only in that circumstance it can be permitted. But otherwise, for an Ahmadi or a Muslim to play the lottery in the first place is something that is forbidden. And no contributions would be accepted from that individual if they were to do that, even if it was from their lottery winnings or it was from any kind of other earnings that they have.
Jazakallah, Imam Sahib. Just want to remind the reviewers how to submit their questions. You can submit your questions either through mkalearn.org. You can submit your questions anonymously there. You can type your question and tweet us at mkalearn, or you can submit your questions in the YouTube comments below. So Imam Sahib, the next question came in is pertaining to prize bonds. Prize bonds are basically is a savings scheme that is popular in Pakistan, where they have occasional drawings and you don't really lose your original worth that you put in, and the bond maintains its value. Are they considered lottery?
Well, this is something that I'm not familiar with. So as I understand it, it's something where a person invests their money and then later on there's a sort of lottery or a gambling by which they can gain more on that money, but there's no possibility of loss. Is that essentially what it is? What I understand from this is that this seems to be a form of interest, because when a person invests their money in a bank and they keep it there for a long period of time, then the reason why it is something which is of benefit to the bank is because then it is a sort of loan that is given to the bank. And so that person is given interest in response to that amount of money that they receive for having invested their money there. Now, if a person invests their money and gives it to the government, then what they are deserving of receiving in return is the exact amount of money that they originally received. They don't deserve to receive any greater amount of money than what they initially had given to the government. So if a person has stipulated ahead of time that he may receive more money than what he had originally given to the government, then that would be an interest-based loan. Now, to take that money that he would have received as interest, and so to pool that money into a kind of a gambling sort of ring, wherein one person who wins the lottery gets all of that interest that everyone had accumulated on that sort of loan that they had given to the government, then that becomes a combination of gambling and interest, as I understand it. Now, if there is something different that applies when it comes to bonds and how it is different from a sort of loan that is given to the government, then perhaps there is some more complexity to it. But if it's simply an amount of money that's given to the government as a loan, with the stipulation that they will receive more money in return, that is interest. And if all the people who are going to receive that interest from the government stipulate that we will gamble, and so everyone will receive their exact amount that they loaned the government back in the original state, but that one person will earn everybody's interest together, then that to me seems like a combination of interest and of gambling.
Jazakallah, Imam Sahib. Just to follow up on these types of smaller type of gambling and lottery. So if somebody has, say, like within their school or in their work, a small get-together type of lottery where everybody puts in something, even if it's not even money, is that still allowed, or is it only where money is involved does it become haram?
If we were to define gambling as something that only applies where currency is involved, then it would open doors for many different types of gambling and lottery, because a person can gamble on commodities as well. In fact, many times people, unfortunately, when they become desperate, they gamble away their assets as well, their cars, their houses, and things like that. So simply trying to confine the definition of gambling to currency actually opens the door for many other types of gambling that are in fact more dangerous perhaps. So gambling is something that has to do not with what is being used to gamble, but with the definition of what gambling is. Now secondly, the question is that what about if we only gamble a very small amount, not a large amount? Now sometimes people, they play poker for hundreds of dollars. But what about if somebody is only playing poker and betting change? They usually use quarters and nickels and dimes and 50 cents and that sort of thing. So is it still gambling? It still fits the definition of gambling, whether it's a small amount of money or a large amount of money. In fact, that step of using change to gamble to a higher degree, to initially start gambling, is something that can be a gateway that leads a person towards gambling to higher and higher levels. So whether it is a large amount or a small amount, gambling is still gambling. And whether a person is using currency or commodities, it is still gambling by the definition of the word gambling as well. And so these factors don't change whether something is permitted or forbidden as far as the Holy Quran has defined it. Because if we started to redefine what gambling means according to these standards, then the prohibition on gambling would become a meaningless formality that had only to do with very specific fiqh and jurisprudence type of rulings, whereas gambling in its essence would continue to exist in Islam, which is not the case.
Jazakallah. So just to clarify, I mean, if somebody within the group of friends in school, they want to gamble some Pokemon cards or some sort of like other toy type thing, that would also fall into the forbidden area as well, or would that not?
Yes. The thing is that if it is gambling in its definition, it might be a very minor form of gambling. But it would still be gambling nonetheless, and a Muslim should not do it. So in the same way that one could argue that simply drinking a very small amount of alcohol is not going to harm that person's health. So in the same way, if a person is just gambling on Pokemon cards and it's not going to really harm him in any immediate way that may be noticeable to that individual, but still it's something that comes under the category of being forbidden in Islam. And the reason is that it is these small things that lead to that greater harm. And that is why the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that that which intoxicates in a large amount is forbidden in a small amount too, because there is an addictive quality to alcohol. And so in the same way, gambling is something that very easily has an addictive quality to it. And that is why there is so much money invested into counseling people to rehabilitate them from gambling addiction and from the loss that they suffer. So even a small amount of gambling is something that is not permitted in Islam.
Jazakallah, Imam Sahib. The next question is, so I think it's pertaining to the recent Powerball drawing, which was over $1 billion. A lot of people said in the news that, or in the media, that if they had won, they can end, poverty, and they can give money to the less fortunate. So if somebody is in that situation where they're less fortunate and somebody has that money to give them, can they take that money or not?
Yes, as was mentioned before, that this question was put to Hazrat Muslim Maud radhiyallahu anhu. And so he said that if a person did not participate himself in the lottery, in the winning of that lottery, then if that person wishes to donate that money towards a certain cause, then it is not forbidden to make use of that money. Now, as to the question of whether a person would actually donate it or not, that's something that's very different. Because unfortunately, our perceptions very easily change with our shifting reality. Right now, we may be living according to a certain, let's say middle-class American lifestyle. And that's because that's what happens to be the income of that particular individual, and they're accustomed to that lifestyle. Now, if a person wins the lottery, it's not just that person's bank account that changes, it's their lifestyle that changes. And so then when a person acquires that different lifestyle, which slowly happens when a person suddenly becomes rich, then that money starts to turn into not just a luxury, but a necessity. Many people who are living in parts of Africa or poor parts of the world, they would consider themselves rich if they had the amount of income that a lot of us have and the amenities that we have. And they think that, if I had enough money as a middle-class American has, I would, give this much to the poor people, and I would, give so much food and build my own mosque over here and have a, which only costs $5,000 by American dollars, and do all these different things. But the thing is that when somebody comes a lot of times from those poor countries to the United States, it doesn't take them very long to have their standard of living adjusted. And then, rather than living a simple life like they previously did, they instead use that money to improve their standard of living, and now by their new standard of wealth, it's no longer enough money for them. So these kind of dreams that people have, these kind of castles that they build in the sky, saying that if I became rich, I would use the money for this and that, they're imagining something with a different reality that has no bearing on the reality of a person who actually wins the lottery. That's why these people so often end up, losing their mind or end up going bankrupt, because adjusting to that reality is something that is not talked about when it comes to winning the lottery. Adjusting to the way that all of our acquaintances, friends, family start treating us differently, that's something that's not talked about when it comes to winning the lottery. So when a person actually wins the lottery, all of those dreams, they disappear, and a very dark and unfortunate reality comes in front of that person where they find themselves alone and empty. And so that's why as many of these stories end up being so unfortunate.
Jazakallah. Just the second part of that question dealt with the recipients of lottery money. So if somebody has won the lottery and there is a poor person or anybody in general that the winner wants to donate money to, can that poor person accept money from a lottery winner, or is that forbidden as well?
No, yes, the poor person can accept money from the lottery winner.
Be it Muslim or anybody, they're allowed to
Yes,
accept
as a Muslim Mother who gave the fatwa, even an Ahmadi Muslim could accept that money.
Okay. Jazakallah. I just want to remind the audience how to submit their questions again one last time. We're running out of time, so we can ask, we have time for a couple more questions. You can either go to mkalearn.org, submit anonymously, tweet us at mkalearn, or ask your questions in the YouTube comment below. So Imam Sahib, in closing, can you just wrap everything up in terms of the lottery, and just let the viewers know the pros and cons and what they can do to get away from the media hype where they're trying to entice you to be involved in the lottery. What else can they do other than that, so their minds can go off this type of forbidden thing and go into more pure areas?
I think one very simple thing that we can do if a person feels tempted to play the lottery is simply to look at the facts, look at the statistics. Because when something is forbidden in Islam, especially when it comes to gambling, the harms of it are so clear that it doesn't take long for a person with a basic level of common sense and research to understand the harms of it. Now, if we look at the stories of people who have won the lottery, how high the percentage is of that story coming to a very negative end. And then when we look at the amount of money that people spend yearly on the lottery, especially those people who are from low-income houses, and how if they had only taken that money, those hundreds of dollars and sometimes thousands of dollars on average that people are spending on the lottery, and simply invested it into something else, then how much their lives could have been improved. And so taking that same amount of money and doing something productive with it is something that, if we imagine, can be enough to take us away from that sort of rosy picture that the people who sell lottery tickets try to paint before us. So there is a very contrasting picture between fantasy and reality. The people who are selling us lottery are depicting a picture that is a fantasy. And unfortunately, in this country, it happens to be the government who is doing it, people who are supposed to be looking out for our interests, because it is in their financial benefit that we buy into that fantasy. But to get away from that fantasy and that hype that there is, we need to look at the reality, the statistics, how the people who are losing the lottery are losing in their lives, how that money disappears in that vain hope of maybe perhaps if I buy one more ticket, then maybe I'll be able to get rid of all my problems. And in that step-by-step process, they destroy all their savings and the food, the money with which they're supposed to buy food for their children. And also the stories of the people who go from having nothing to having everything, and then what effect it has on their lives. So looking at the stark difference between the reality and the fantasy is something that should be sufficient to make a person to be able for a person to be able to understand how harmful it is and why they should stay far, far away from it.
Jazakallah. And just one final question. Can you explain what the lottery actually is in terms of in America? Where does the money go, if you know? Where does it, how is it collected? And what are the other stipulations that people don't really see in the media that are happening in the back, that where the money is flowing and how it's coming? So if you can describe a little bit about that, and for the viewers' sake.
Based on my just very basic level of research, I haven't looked too much into it, but most of the money when it comes to lottery is not necessarily going towards the purpose that we think that it is going for. Now, firstly, the people who win the lottery, they don't receive that entire amount of money. Much of it goes towards taxes, and so they receive a fraction of the money that's actually something that is advertised as being what an individual will win. And so the reality is something right there that is very different from what is advertised or what is put before us. But also, when the money goes to the government, as it's being advertised that it's going towards education, then it's not necessary that the education system will necessarily improve, because the funding that was previously allocated towards education ends up being distributed elsewhere in many cases. And that lottery money ends up completely supporting the education system, which previously was supported by other tax dollars. And so in reality, when a person is being told that their lottery is funding schools, in practicality, that lottery money is actually funding whatever other programs that the government wants to fund, because the same amount that is coming in from lottery is being taken away from schools and put into other government programs. And so in reality, it is very false advertising. On the surface, yes, technically all that money may be going to the schools, but if that same amount or a similar amount is being taken out and put elsewhere, then that's definitely not something that can be said in honesty to be going towards schools. And so in a way, it is a very false type of advertising that unfortunately has happened, where a new type of taxation has come forward, which feeds on the despair that poor people many times face and pulls them into a destructive and addictive behavior by which a new source of revenue is created for the government. And so it's unfortunate on both sides. Those people who are poor, they get addicted to the hope of being able to pull themselves out of despair, and on a very small and incremental level, they end up giving their money towards taxes that they needed for themselves. And so that's one of the aspects of that addiction that pulls that person in. They think just one more bite of Oreo cookies and that's it, I'll be good, but then they end up eating the whole bag. And so on the government level, it's also addictive as well, because when they see all this funding coming in and it takes away their deficit and they're able to do things that they previously weren't able to, then they also become dependent on that money. And when such a huge source of revenue is proposed to be taken away on moral grounds, it's something that's unacceptable for them because they're addicted to that amount of money. And so on both sides, there is an unfortunate addiction and there is a counterdependency and a sort of destructive cycle that spirals downwards. And this is one of the sort of ailments and one of the very negative points that we are seeing in the United States today, which inshallah through Islam can be removed and can be reformed.
Jazakallah, Imam Sahib. Very interesting discussion and very interesting topic. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for tonight's show. So if you do have a question that hasn't gotten answered, you can continue to submit your questions to mkalearn.org or tweet us at mkalearn, or submit the question to faithforum@mkalearn.org. So if you leave your contact information, we'll definitely get that question answered for you. So that concludes tonight's episode. I want to thank Jazakallah to Imam Sahib for answering the questions. And I want to say thank you for everybody in the audience who asked the questions. Our next episode will be in 2 weeks' time, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll give you the topic then. And from then on, we'll join you there. So my name is Saud Iqbal, and signing off. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.